So that video just illustrates sort of the scale of the problem that we're dealing with in relation to mass marketing fraud and the amount of money that's lost each year to the UK economy, but also the detrimental effect it has on consumers and on the victims. The team's only been established since 2014, but we started in 2012, and it started because of this chap. This is Len. He was, when I used to do a proper job and actually like go and see actual proper people, I used to go and visit scam victims. And he was one of my first victims that we went to see. And he was 95, but he was spending £600 a month on different mail scams that were targeting him. He was also being used as a money mule and taking in other scam victims' monies and then passporting it onto the criminals. So he became part of the criminal network. But he was groomed. He'd been groomed by these criminals for a very long time. And what we found was we weren't actually able to help him. It didn't matter how many times we visited him. It didn't matter whether we took police with us, whether we took social services. We weren't able to stop him from responding to the different scam mail. So what we said was we had I got very frustrated by this situation and the fact that actually if we'd managed to get him a lot earlier in his journey, and a lot earlier when he's been initially targeted by the criminals, we would have been able to stop that brainwashing and grooming and be able to help him. So one of the things I thought about doing was Royal Mail. If you're taking 60 bits of post to somebody's house every day, you're breaking your back. So the posties know where these people live. They know where these scam victims live. Because once you get added onto the suckers list, you get repeatedly targeted, you get more and more mail. So the people that are the postal delivery service know where those people live. So I approached Royal Mail, and initially they went, no, that's not our job. Our job is just to deliver the mail. I didn't leave them alone. I harassed them for about 2 years, managed to get some proof of concept funding, and I also managed to work with the Met Police, who had seized what is called a suckers list, which is a victim list of 100,000 names. So what we did, we went around splitting those names into local authority trading standards areas and saying to, for example, East Sussex Trading Standards, you've got 1,000 victims in your area, what are you going to do about it? And start to share that information out with the local authorities. So this is where we sort of are now. So where we started off dealing with just with mail scams and identifying the victims that were on mail scam lists and trying to support those victims and do the early interventions via the local trading standard services, we've now moved on a little bit to do prevention work around telephone scams and doorstep crime as well. One of the things, sort of the golden thread for our team is everything we do needs to support the victim or the people helping the victims. So it's around testing out effective interventions, what works, and actually trying to ask those victims what would help you, what would have stopped you doing that, and trying to work with them rather than, I think historically, we always saw safeguarding as something we did to people, not with them. So a cup of tea and a conversation, not something we do and go in and actually do something to people. I think we've all done it in our jobs when you're in sort of that role where you're visiting people and you think that you're protecting them. People are allowed to make their own choices, and it's about trying to work with people. So, prevention. We've got some policy aims. One of them is prevention. We will work with partners to ensure all counter-fraud work focuses on preventing fraud and scams. We do this by obtaining the lists that the criminals use to target the victims. We've got just shy of 1 million victims on our database. We gather those through our international investigations and working with key partners to get those lists so that we're able to then go and see those people that are on the lists. Generally what will happen is if I went to visit Mrs. Jones and said to Mrs. Jones, I think you're on a list, I think you're responding to different scam mail, she will go, no, I'm not. I don't respond to that sort of mail. Because there'll be lots of reasons. One, she might not realise she's on a list. Two, she might not realise it's a crime and she actually genuinely believes she's going to win. 3, she's been told not to tell anybody because the criminals have told her if she tells anyone she won't get her money. And she's also worried because it's the only social contact she gets. She doesn't get any other phone calls because her family don't ring her up. Or 4, there's a shame element. Imagine if you actually had been doing this for 10 years and somebody knocks on your door and you think, what? I've literally lost thousands and thousands of pounds. We had a lady last week who identified had lost £500,000 for responding over a 20-year period. So we're talking about that £500,000. She might have millions of pounds, so that might not mean very much to her, whereas someone else can lose 1,000 but not have any additional funds. We had one lady who'd lost £80,000 over a 20-year period, but what it got down to the fact was She wasn't even feeding herself properly. And when she realised it was a scam and stopped responding, she wrote a letter to the local trading standards saying she managed to buy herself a new cardigan. So it's really simple things for different people. So we try and focus on the harm rather than the amount of money. It's actually what harm is it doing to individuals rather than this massive sum of money. This is Alison. She's one of our more proactive trading standards services. So currently we've got 90% of all local trading standards signed up to take their victims from the national scams team. So 90% of local authorities are doing something with this intelligence. What we do insist is they don't just take it and it goes into a black hole. We insist that they provide us with feedback to show that they've actually done something. So written to, phoned, visited those victims and actually what worked, what didn't. And then to measure actually how much they think people have lost and actually what was effective. Do they think they've saved somebody any money? And to provide us with that feedback so that we can get a bigger national picture of it, which then allows us to go and bash up high to get additional funding injected into local services, but also the national services so that we can continue to do the work that we're doing. I say bash lightly. It's not, I don't bash lightly to be fair, but one of the other parts of the team is our focus is on, obviously we've talked a lot about victims, but it's the criminals. 99% of the criminals are based abroad. Criminals do not target on their own patches. You do not get English criminals targeting English consumers for this sort of mail scams. The Americans will target the English will target the Americans. Because the Americans don't ring Action Fraud or Citizens Advice or local trading standards to say, I've got a letter from you. So it's very underreported. It just helps with the underreporting. So we work with our foreign counterparts in law enforcement, for example, the Americans, because they will have the criminals on their patch. They won't have any victims, so they won't have any evidence. They won't have any impact statements. They won't have any victim statements. So we provide them with all of the victim statements from UK victims, bundle it all up, chuck it to America. They then take the effective prosecutions and shut the companies down. We also work on bigger cases where we shut people like the check processors down, or we did 6 fulfilment houses that were in the Netherlands who were receiving mail from all over the country in relation to prize draw and clairvoyant scams. And when they did the raids, they had to sweep the cash up with brooms because there was so much money in these premises. And an aeroplane was coming from Canada once a week to pick up the bags of cash and take them back to Canada to process the money. So it's organised crime as well. So where historically we've had a lot of people being very much like, oh, no one falls for that. Oh, that's not a crime. We're talking organised crime groups that are in the same categories like the cartel. So we're not talking about someone sitting in their room on a computer. It's very big business. And again, Royal Mail. We work with Royal Mail and the mail providers. This is 5 million now. We've stopped 5 million letters from getting into the country, so actually stopping it before it gets to the victim. So you're not asking people to differentiate between a genuine lottery or a fake one. We're just stopping it getting in at one port at Heathrow. Awareness. This is a big one. We'll increase awareness of fraud and scams and the harm they cause to victims. Again, I still get people saying no one falls for that. All those people must be stupid. It makes me very angry when people say that, because these are people that are targeted because of their situational vulnerability, and then they're groomed, and then their money is stolen, and their personal details are trafficked. So we raise awareness by the Friends Against Scams campaign. I look so short and so just pleased to be there in this, at the end of the photo. However, this is a team and we run our Friends Against Scams campaign, which was developed to be a grassroots campaign to get people in local communities talking about scams. Talk about it, take away the shame. We find that in this arena, peer-to-peer support is so important. I liken it to, so when I had my first child, she's 9 now, you're quite vulnerable when you have your first child, I felt anyway, but you find another mum that drinks wine and sometimes hates their kid as well, and that makes it all right, and that makes it okay. So when you do that, and that's the same with scams, so if you've got somebody that goes, I will scam too, you feel less silly, you feel less shame, you feel more able to talk about it. So Friends Against Scams is a very quick 20-minute training session, either face-to-face or online, where people learn about scams and then they're asked to take that knowledge and do something proactive with it. Share your status on social media, talk to 5 people about scams. If you want to do a bit more, you become a scam champion. If you're very important, you get to be a scam ambassador. I'm not a scam ambassador yet, apparently, so that's fun. So you get to be a scam champion or a friend. So if you're a scam champion, you go out and recruit other friends and you get the training package and it's all for free. So you go out and train your book club, or you can do it in your workplace. So we have lots of trading standards officers that are scam champions as well. We have a target we started this in 2016 and we will be, and the team we will be at 1 million friends by the end of midnight on the 31st of December 2020. We're on 280,000 as of today, and over 1,200 scam champions. So we are getting there with it. Victims. We will improve care and support to victims of fraud and scams. We run a scheme called Scam Marshals, which is around people that have been victims and actually turning their experience into something positive. It's back to that peer-to-peer support. So we ask them to collect the mail for us, so they act as fast-time intelligence gatherers for us, so we know we see exactly what's coming into the country and how it's getting to the victims. And we also ask them to go out and share their experiences of how they were victimised and how that made them feel, again, to get other people to share their experiences. What we find with the Scam Marshals is that the biggest benefit to it is around the increase in wellbeing. It gives people a purpose. So they're collecting the mail, and we often find, so we had a lady called Sigrid who then went out and collected the mail from everybody in her area. And we had another chap called Barry who'd lost £4,000, and he set up a clinic in his local day centre once a week so people could come and ask his advice. So he became sort of an ambassador for us and an expert. And that then gave him that, it increased his wellbeing because it refocused him and gave him a purpose, which his previous purpose had been responding to the scam mail. Again, we've got 1,300 Scam Marshals as well. We do some collaborative work in the Joint Fraud Task Force is around how banks need to up their game in relation to fighting fraud, and actually how public and private sector can work more effectively together. It was a bit of a snail's pace to start with, but we seem to be getting some momentum there, and the banks are working a lot harder to try and support people that are in vulnerable situations and support them if they are defrauded. This is Keith Brown from Bournemouth University. We work a lot with him around wellbeing and actually measuring effectively the interventions that we put together so that we get that academic backing to it. And this is Marilyn Baldwin from Think Jessica. She was one of our biggest champions from the very start. Vulnerability, and I think this is probably one of the most important things that we do, is we work towards a more flexible approach to consumer vulnerability. Vulnerability is fluid. People are not vulnerable, and actually that word is very disempowering, and also vulnerable people won't identify that they're vulnerable because they're probably too vulnerable to identify that they are vulnerable. And we move in and out of it. You have 4 periods of mental health within the course of a year. And there are things, situations and spikes in your life that are going to make you more vulnerable. Redundancy, divorce, having a baby, bereavements, retiring. All these different spikes that can happen within your life make people vulnerable at that particular time. But they move in and out of those. So actually anybody can be vulnerable to a scam at any time. There are things that increase our vulnerability, like loneliness, and like the fact that being lonely is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And actually the fact that you don't have that social interaction. And obviously cognitive decline. Those things do make people more vulnerable, their situations more vulnerable. But we need to be very flexible about that approach, because just because you're 80 and you live on your own doesn't mean you are vulnerable. It could mean you are, but it doesn't mean you are. So, this is Linny. She's 70. She was having her knee replaced. She responded to an advert in a tabloid newspaper for a knee support. She responded to an advert for the knee support. The knee support came. Within a week, she'd had 3 letters targeting her for fake lotteries. On the same day that she got the letters that targeted her for the fake lotteries, she got the letter to tell her when her knee operation was going to be. And on that same day, she got a PayPal scam. And on the day she got the PayPal scam, she put all of her bank details into it and she had money removed. So she was scammed and she had money removed from her credit card. She also provided me with the fake lottery letters so that I could look at them, so that I could then track them back to where they'd come from. So it's that simple. What happened was she'd applied for a knee support. She lives on her own. She's in the right age bracket. So the company, it was a lead generator company that went 70, lonely, socially isolated, possibly got a disability because she needs a knee support. Right, we'll be able to target her. We'll add her to a suckers list. And at the same time, those people had shared her data with a phishing scam. So that's why she received the PayPal scam, whether that was chance or not. So she received the phishing scam. So on the day that she had received the letter for her knee operation was a day where she was vulnerable on that particular day, and she responded to that scam. Now, she's my mum. Now, she emailed me that PayPal scam and said, is this a scam? And I emailed back within a minute, which I don't usually do, And in that minute, she'd panicked and put all of her details in. In that minute, it was literally instant. She got herself into what's called a hot state, panicked because of everything that was going on that day, with the fact she needed to sort everything before she went into hospital for 3 weeks, and this was all going to happen, and who was going to do this, and who was going to do that, and she panicked and did it. What happened, she had to cancel all her bank cards, which was a massive pain in the bum for her, which she didn't do. But she's my mum. I'm head of the National Scams team, but it was situational vulnerability. Now, she shares her story. She hates the photo and hates the fact I talk about her. But it's the fact, this just illustrates how it's situational. She's not vulnerable now. She's the least vulnerable woman that I've ever met in my life. Like, you wouldn't take her on, you really wouldn't. But on that day, she was vulnerable, and on that day, they targeted her. So, what will your pledge be? What can you do to protect your family, friends and neighbours from scams? And what can you do to protect people in your community from scams? And how can you help us to reach our 1 million target?